thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Ludmila, for organizing this and your team, and your Gaele to have connected me from California through Yerevan to Moscow. And I'm thrilled to be here. I also am thrilled to be here because in 2000, I came here as a student because there was embargo on Iran and I couldn't go to Iran to do my dissertation. So I came to this building, to the art history program with Professor Chukazian, both of them, sitting here, and I taught here for a couple of years. So it's wonderful to be back here. So my paper is part of a book that I'm writing with Uri Berberian on Armenian women's organizations in Iran, and this is their last big event before the Islamic Revolution. And I'm approaching fashion history and through art history. So this is my first fashion conference. Forgive me for the shortcomings. On the evening of May 15, 1974, 44 Armenian women posed in their heavy, quote-unquote, traditional dresses as models for a special viewing for Empress Farah Pahlavi of Iran. Organized by one of Iran's rare feminist women's organizations, active since 1939, the Armenian Women Union, the exhibition of costumes of Armenian women was a byproduct of several years of intense volunteer work. While the royal visit was a woman's affair, in labor, essence, and aesthetics, behind the Empress and her AWU host stood a wall of power men. Minister of Culture, Palbot, Minister of Information and Tourism, Kianpur, Minister of Education, Sharifi, Senator and Ski Federation President, Abovyan, Majlis Representatives, Saginian and Bovakinian, Commander of Imperial Guard, General Badrayi, and Diocese Council and ARF party representatives. AWU had poured its efforts in completing the steps ordinarily undertaken by a major museum. The art history research on women's costumes, selection of specific artifacts as originals to be reproduced, choosing of models, creation of dresses, collection of costume accessories, construction of a stage set, choreographing and photographing of models, composition and translation of the academic text, and the final publication of 2 exhibition catalogs. The entirety of the project, with its various moving parts, was driven by systemic order and aesthetic priority, now public-facing and honed to perfection by AWU. By tracing the history of this exhibition in the broad context of late Pahlavi Iran, I propose that the double liminal Irano-Armenian women deployed the discourse of domesticity and traditionalism, of dressmaking and hat-making, to interject women's agency in mainstream Armenian histories, while at once to interpose their own narrative into the wider Pahlavi promotion of folklore as an expression of modernity. Unprecedented material wealth in the late 1960s Iran was coupled with a top-down policy of rapid urbanization, cultural nationalism, consumerism, and bourgeoisification. The socio-cultural ruptures created by these economic and infrastructural developments were dampened with a discursive return to tradition and folklore that helped shape secular historiography, where modernity was to be attained by a valorization of tradition. Traditional women were set as the binary opposite of modern man and machine. Starting in the late 1960s, state agencies and mass media featured regional women's attire, while Iranian women, for instance, Iran's teen princess, participated in international competitions in similar regional costumes. As the head of cultural institutions, including 9 museums, Farah's role was pivotal. In sharp aesthetic and discursive contrast to the traditional woman, she was wholly modern yet entirely Iranian, signaled by binary press representations and her own keen sense of style. Each of Farah's official appearances was a two-pronged fashion statement about modernity, timeliness, and historicity and national longevity. Famously, she commissioned Iranian architect and designer Keyhan Khosrovani to create a state wardrobe for the 2,500-year celebration of the monarchy in 1971. This discourse on tradition and folklore were celebrated across Iran's religious, ethnic, linguistic, and regional diversities in order to ground modernity in one single domain, the monarchy. On the micro level of the Armenian community, the village women's costume of Esfahan had traction in this discovery of the Irano-Armenian brand of tradition. More than anywhere else in Iran, these women, with their traditional lifestyles, embodied Parta Chatterjee's inner domain of nationalism that needed to be sanitized and classified as tradition. So this is very interesting because last summer, Uriah and I were here. We went to the museum, the History Museum in the archives, and we asked for whatever Iranian-related women you have, we want to see. And they gave us a file with lots of pictures in it, about maybe 30 pictures in it. And it was very interesting for me how these two images on your left, which are actual dresses of actual women from the 19th century or even mid-20th century, where some of the villages, Armenian villages of mutual buddies, still wore this tradition. They were mixed up with what I'm going to show you as part of the costume exhibition. So all of them were lumped into this is Iran's Armenians. And I thought that was very interesting. One is actual, authentic, real women wearing it, and the other one wore highly manipulated, designed costumes. It was in this broader context that under the presidency of Army Nersessians, an executive board was led by Emma Abrahamyan in the late 1972. The research committee under their direction consisted of devoted AWU members, whereas the initial art history research and the selection of images of specific artifacts included seals, coins, illustrated manuscripts, paintings, photographs, and travelogues were done collectively. Each of the 5 committee members was assigned the supervision of 8 artifacts and their translation into a wearable costume. This was followed by a period of purposeful recruitment of girls and women with specific facial and physical features matching the historical artifacts. Volunteer work dominated and fueled the project, where the labor and the material acquisition were planned flexibly. 3 AWU members volunteered as both model and dressmaker, and 7 members called upon daughters or nieces for whom they made the dresses. 22 professional tailors offered their labor at no cost to produce 28 costumes, including one for a 6-year-old girl. The crowns, hats, and embroideries were crafted separately by both professionals and volunteers, including the Russian, one of the few unique Russian hat makers, Mrs. Kavalova. Many models purchased the fabric at their own expense and tailored their own dresses. The dress representing Garin, Erzurum, for example, was made of an Indian fabric purchased in London, which was a pretty frequently location in the 70s for the well-to-do Armenians of Iran. The 44 costumes were the culmination of not only 18 months of research, planning, and production, but also several decades of interchange, a conversation between scholarship and practice that evolved into the 1974 exhibition. In line with Chatterjee's proposition that nationalism's success rested on situating the women's question in an inner domain of sovereignty, early 20th century Armenian nationalist historiography broached the Armenian woman through the history of her attire. Mkhitaryan congregation priest scholar Vartan Hatsumi's The Armenian Woman Facing History followed his history of ancient Armenian costume, two of the earliest exhaustive scholarship tracing women's agency in Armenian history. His historiographical pairing of the Armenian woman, Hayuhin, and traditional costume, Hin Araz, deposited both in the knowledge category of ethnography, where 9 of his images served as AWU originals. In 1966, when AWU hosted a cocktail for the International Congress of Women in Tehran, the teenage daughters of 4 AWU members dressed in Persian and traditional costumes circulated among the 350 guests. And when I say traditional, these are in quotations. These are invented traditions. The following year, in the next major scholarly work, Araket Batrik's Armenian Costume, was published in Soviet Armenia and was reviewed in the dominant Armenian language daily of Tehran, Alik. 11 of his images served as AWU originals. Outside this traditionalist practices, women's modern fashion continued to cause public anxiety among the Irano-Armenian community. In 1971, Alik poked fun at women's changing fashion using a biblical analogy. Quote, poor Yeva, except for a fig leaf, had nothing to expose to our forefather Adam. But her sisters today, they have everything of every shape to empty the pockets of Adam. When in May 1972, Iran's International Women's Club organized an exhibition of regional costumes at Royal Hilton, AWU presented a new Julfan and a Parian costume among the 40 other Iranian regional costumes. And these are the two, and interesting, we interviewed the one with Peria clothing, and when Farah approached her, she asked her, so what are you doing in life? And she said, oh, I have a bachelor's degree. I just finished my bachelor's degree in chemistry. And Farah said, oh my, you're such an educated peasant. And this joke is lost on Americans, but I'm sure this audience would understand that much better. Although AWU regularly kept the public abreast of its processes and sources towards the exhibition's opening, it omitted to note that 10 of the costume originals came from Flora Grigorian's postcards, again published in Soviet Armenia, which by the virtue of the medium, they were very transportable, easily transportable to Iran, and easily distributed to the tailors and the models who were making the costumes. At least 2 of the costumes, either in their entirety, as in the case of Konya, or partially, as in the case of Trabzon, were 19th century dresses. The latter, a survival object from the Armenian genocide, while the former borrowed from a Romanian family, Armenian family, which required insurance for its use in the exhibition. While Peria and Charmahal costumes were gifted from private collection, those of New Julfa and Ahal Sakhar repurposed old fabric, including a priest's pilon, to create these costumes. The models whom we interviewed confirmed that the committee persistently sought out antique accessories to complete the costumes. Abovyan, a graduate of Tehran's École des Beaux-Arts, among the 27 female artists in Tehran's 1964 Biennale, and a professor of sculpture with Talinn University's Faculty of Fine Arts, was intimately familiar with this practice of scavenging the alleyways of southern bazaars, Tehran's bazaar, in search of Qajar-era belt buckles, key locks, jewels, coins, and other riches. As a member of the Fine Arts faculty, along with Tanavoli, Bosanyan, and Grigorian, she knew how to seduce the past to birth the modern. Incorporating rare, antique, and inexpensive secular and in-use religious artifacts with the dresses significantly contributed the interjection of this Armenian women's narrative in the wider Pahlavi promotion of folklore as an expression of modernity. They completely fitted in with the larger context. To effectively stage the exhibition, AWU enlisted professionals from within the community as members of the coordinating committee. Elongated but low wooden platforms were erected along walls of the basement of the hall of the Armenian Club to render the exhibition as a chronologically evolving experience for the viewer. A, quote, historical sequence, as remarked the exhibition catalog, that expressed both continuity of traditions and cultural evolution, from Urartian and Parthian characters to 19th century urbanites and freedom fighters. The models were coached in a set of arm and torso movements performed while standing in situ. An electronic wire system was devised to enable Model 21, who had arranged the musical program, to access the on and off button. At certain intervals, the models performed their movements as the music came on. In the absence of music, they froze as if statues in a museum. The ice-cold and bloodless Armenian woman whom Rafi had mocked as Modi Gugla in 1890 now stood motionless, reclaiming in no uncertain terms women's place in both Armenian history and historiography, as well as Iranian modernity and monarchy. Guiding the Empress through the exhibition, Abovyan explained the qualities and characters of each of the costumes on live display. The mythical figure of an Urartian goddess, historical characters of Queen Satenit, Ashten, Duranduh, Geran, and Zabed, and generic figures of nun, peasants, brides, and beauties from various regions and periods. A prosperous New Julfan merchant's wife, and aristocrats from Tbilisi. While approaching and inspecting each, Farah engaged her ethnically Armenian subjects with interest in the dresses. To two models, she teased, "Aren't you hot in that? Aren't you getting tired?" At the third, she inquired about the golden lacework, whereas at another, she observed that nylon stockings had not been invented at that period. But beyond the polite chit-chat, the costumes mediated the individual relationship of subjects to monarch. Instructions were given to those models with queen and princess costumes to bow and not to curtsy when approached by Farah. Models in costumes of aristocrats, beauties, and nuns performed simple courtesies, while peasants lowered themselves into very deep courtesy to the ground. And I'm not sure what royal protocol prescribed for freedom fighters. Please don't shoot me. costume wearing, ordinary Iranian subjects, minorities at that, several of whose Persian was unenviable, personified the essence and status of historical figures and thus altered the social hierarchy vis-a-vis their own monarch with political power and cultural capital to reckon with. Despite one expert critique that the costumes were cut and sewed based on modern conventions and not historical one, the costumes made a splash in the national and international mass media, and the production of a film by Iran's national radio and television aired in various cinemas and at the annual Shiraz Art Festival. The day before the official opening, Tehran's popular daily Identities showcased 4 of the costumes with an article entitled "Something More Than a Fashion Show," while Tamasha described it as a much respected labor in reviving cultural rights. Kayhan International, Tehran Journal, Alik, and Boston's Hyrenic also featured the costumes. State endorsement and public success of the event also gave the AWU added clout to translate the costume in a richly illustrated book. A new publication committee was added to the costume committee, to which joined the London-based fashion photographer for Vogue and Flair, Peter Garabetta. And they went to the different regions, including to the north, so that they could take the background of Mount Ararat and some of the Armenian monasteries. And they went south to Isfahan and photographed them so that the costumes were further authenticated. And also in Tehran they published, and even the costumes themselves were so authentically created, invented, that eventually they become originals to be copied. I mean, if you go into Wikipedia, you'll see that they're actually presented as original copies, and sometimes they didn't know, AWU didn't know which was the actual original, which was the photograph here in this case. So in Pahlavi, Iran, the rest of the 1970s continued to be shaped by an intense awareness and performance of fashion and fashionability, where tradition and folklore continued to be juxtaposed to contemporary Western styles and tastes as normative. One validated the other. AWU committee members such as Abovyan and Yerevan were among those who designed and tailored their own attires regularly, practicing Homi Bhabha's Chakravarti's theory of minoritarian modernism. And these were some of the costumes of the modern ones that they wore. And during the exhibition, you can see a contrast between the costumes themselves and what the AWA hosts are wearing. They're all very modern. Blurring the domain of high fine arts with low art, craft, and of the artist with a mute tailor craftswoman, the exhibition transformed women's traditional domestic work into a tasteful display of art. Domesticity itself was transformed into a museum practice as a vital interlocutor and not just an interloper in language, politics, and public ethics, forming new relationship between minority and monarch, between history and fashion. Thank you very much.